Thanks for joining us today, guys. Today we're joined by Rand Fishkin. He is a fellow Seattle area CEO, entrepreneur, and always excited to have one of them on the show. And so, Rand, without further ado, would love for you to kind of give a little background of your experience to the audience.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Liam. So let's see, dropped out of college at the University of Washington, locally here in the Seattle area, and started doing web design initially. That business was very unsuccessful. I was working with my mom, Jillian, here in Seattle, and we pivoted into SEO because I had started this blog called SEO Moz after trying to do some SEO for some of our clients and having a lot of struggles and frustrations. That blog, SEO Moz, became first a consulting business and then a software business, and then raised some venture capital. I became the CEO, and over the next 7-8 years, that company scaled fairly rapidly, raised a couple more rounds of venture, and I stepped down as CEO in 2014 after a rough bout with depression. Promoted my longtime chief operating officer to the CEO role, and stayed on the board of directors and at the company as an individual contributor for another few years until I left in 2018 after lots of painful disagreements with management and my board, and started SparkToro, which is my current company, the next day. So gave myself like a whole 12 hours off between jobs. And yeah, interestingly, I think a whole bunch of, lots of details of stories in there, but new company, not venture backed, not hundreds of people, staying very, very small. So, went from, CEO of a couple 100-person company to a three-person company, and much, much happier, more satisfied with that. Raised money in a unique way. Wrote a book about all this stuff called Lost and Founder, which I think might be how you found me. But yeah, so that is most of my public career.
Did you have the idea for SparkToro ready to go? And was that in a direction you wanted kind of your previous company to pivot to, and the disagreements led you to starting on your own? Or was this just something like, hey, I'm out and oh yeah, there's this thing, I'm going to go do it, and just jump 2 feet in?
If a court of law is asking, I had the idea for SparkToro on the night of February 28th, 2018.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It just came to me in a dream,
and
then, the next morning I was like, oh, that's what I should do.
Off and running. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for you, it was kind of starting in marketing, but then a transition into kind of software as well, right? That kind of happened, I assume, organically, just through your experience in the marketing space.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the interesting part, and I get asked about this all the time, because I think there's a chapter in Lost and Founder about it, and I was sort of for a while well known as one of the few like agency owners who had transitioned to a software company that raised venture and became successful, and so lots of like agency and consulting folks are like, "Ooh, Rand, how do I do that?" And the key is to be terrible at running an agency. That really, really helped. So on the consulting side, never really built like a very scalable team, didn't figure out the structures and functions that would help that work. I think I've learned a lot more actually from studying how successful agencies that eventually ended up using, either Moz's software or now SparkToros have done it. But the other thing that I was good at was building an audience of people who were perfect customers for the software and not the consulting. And that was, again, sort of an accidental marketing investment, right? I had started this blog and a video series and, kind of a content and email list around sharing information that was useful and interesting to professional SEOs, not particularly useful and interesting to people who wanted to hire someone to do professional SEO. And so when we launched software, we already had the perfect audience who knew us, liked us, trusted us. I think that's incredibly rare for a consulting business to already have accidentally built a content marketing platform that works perfectly for selling to not their customers, but someone else.
So you had a lot of hopeful consultants that thought they could jump into software, it seems, and probably sorely mistaken as they uncovered or had their own bumps along the way, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, Liam. Like, by no means were we experts at building software. I didn't even know what software as a service was. I had no idea how a subscription model worked. I didn't know what customer lifetime value meant or how to measure churn and retention. Like, none of these things. Completely unsophisticated software entrepreneur, just as I was a completely unsophisticated web designer or completely unsophisticated SEO consultant. But we accidentally kind of lucked into a lot of the key elements, and then, made the best of it, learned. I think actually by taking that very first venture round helped significantly advance my whatever thought process and exposure to people who'd done this before. And, you get the network of your other venture portfolio CEOs, all that kind of stuff was definitely helpful.
Makes sense. So as you were going through this journey and you were reaching that point of profitability, right? Didn't have to worry about roof over the head, food on the table. What was your strategic framework of where to invest the money, right? Did it all go back into the business? Did it go to, taking care of the wife, publishing a wife's book? Like, how did you think through where to put that profitability?
Yeah, I mean, my financial journey has been fascinating. So let's see, from 2004 to about 2007. So maybe like 3-4 years spread across there with a few months where this wasn't true. I was making so little that I could not afford rent or bills or anything like that. And so I had moved out of my apartment that I shared with some roommates after college, after dropping out, and moved in with my girlfriend, Geraldine, who's now my wife, and she paid the rent and all our bills. And essentially she was like our first investor in a way, right? Because I could not have operated this money losing venture that did terribly. My mom was making nothing at all. We had a third person we were working out with for a while. We couldn't pay them. Even when we had our first software engineer, Matt, he and I had a few months where we had to okay, do you want a paycheck this month or should I get it? Or who's going to get the paycheck? Very weird way to pay people. And that ended right about the time we got venture, money. And so essentially we had all this debt. A lot of our money was going to paying off that debt. And then as we got to profitability, and then when we took venture, then you're in debt forever, right? So there was never a time when you say hey, when you were out of debt. The only time you're out of debt after a venture investment is when you sell the company or go public, because it's not that you owe the bank money, but you owe your venture investors a growth rate that will get 10, hopefully 20, 50 times their investment back to them over a 7 to 12 year lifespan, right? Whatever the lifespan of the fund is and what the LPs, the people who put money into the venture fund expect. So every dollar at Moz went back into the business, trying to grow that at the maximum, sort of growth rate that was possible. And interestingly, SparkToro has been profitable since about 6 months after it launched. So we launched in April 2020. I think we were profitable in November. So yeah, about 6-7 months. And the thing that we've been doing is just building up cash, essentially hoarding cash so that we can repay our investors. We basically have to pay them back their initial sum, and then everybody participates in profit sharing pro rata, essentially to their ownership percentage in the company, which SparkToro is an LLC, extremely unusual for a software startup. We did that for a variety of reasons. Basically, we don't mind paying lots of taxes in one particular way, and we wanted the freedom and flexibility to do profit sharing in our particular way. So yeah, man, very different.
You talked a little bit about the bouts of depression kind of at the top and led to stepping away. I'm assuming, and would love your confirmation or take me a different direction, right? That that was correlated somewhat to the stress and the of the growth rate that you had to obtain with these outside investors, right? Plus the personnel that you had to grow with the company, et cetera, right? The compounding factors that grow and grow and grow. And I'm guessing conscious choice as you started Spark Toro to go a different way. So would love to kind of understand kind of the impact that had on you, right, as the leader, and where you chose to kind of take it and go. And, when you started from scratch, some of the choices and why you went that way.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very tough, I think, when you are experiencing those sort of spiky, severe, mental and emotional issues, to know exactly where it comes from. And I don't want to say for certain, like, oh, it was outside forces, right? The stress of being a venture-backed CEO, or the stress of the growth rate, or the stress of the team. There were definitely lots of things that made me unhappy, and I think not my best, most productive self at that time. Lots of mistaken beliefs and things that I think now are foolish and wouldn't do again. Lots of stuff in the venture-backed culture and tech startup culture that I hate and don't resonate with. But I don't know, man. Like, depression is a weird thing, right? Like it could have been absolutely the case that everything could have been going perfect, and I still would have had depression, and that's okay. Like that's just how it works. Sometimes I've talked to plenty of people who, that things in their life are going great and their mental health is not. And I've talked to plenty of people who the inverse, things are going really badly, but they're sort of happy and healthy and functional and great. I think that these things aren't necessarily connected. So hard to know. I will say for sure what is true is those things made me deeply unhappy. I did not want to repeat them. So I don't love having a big team of people to manage. I do not love layers of management, right? Where sort of, one person reports to a manager who reports to a VP, who reports to a C-level, who reports to, I think that the disconnect between the incentives and rewards that you get to focus on as an individual contributor and as a business owner are just not there. I don't love hustling. I hate hustle culture. I try not to work more than 35, maybe max 40 hours a week. I don't think that the hours that you work between, say, maybe it varies from person to person, but say hour 50 to hour 70, I think that is a net negative on next week's performance, especially, if we're talking about, lifting boxes and carrying them over from one place to another. Sure, you can put in more hours and get more output. But if you're talking about making intellectually rigorous best decisions for strategy in a business, or marketing investment decisions, or product decisions, no way, right? Like the 15 hours, the first 15 hours you work in a week are probably the best ones. And if you can stay well rested and get regular exercise and some sunshine and live in a place with clean air and water and eat well, those decisions move up and up and up. And so I think that I wish startup entrepreneurs would try to maximize those things, because I think that your job, I certainly view my job as not get the most work done I can every week. No, that's a terrible goal. My goal is make the best possible decisions that I can every day. Choose what to work on, choose how to work on it, choose who's going to work on it, choose that no one is going to work on this thing because it does not matter. That stuff, I think, that's how I've seen mature, experienced CEOs build very incredible businesses, and mature, experienced individuals who just run their own business or work for someone else run happy, successful lives. That's what I'm optimizing toward.
If you were to go back to kind of the beginning of the growth of Moz, right, there were a lot of things that you articulated in terms of management style, in terms of, VC culture, tech culture. Do you think you would have been able to get to your opinion of those without going through it?
And I mean, I wish I could. I want to think that in some ways the answer to that is yes, at least for some of those things. I'm sure not for all of them, but I want to believe that I'm someone who can learn from other people's experiences, that I can, read a case study or study data and then, sort of figure out that path is wrong or unwise, break out of an echo chamber around an area of thought. I'll give you an example of this. So for forever, I have been a sort of, generally speaking, broadly politically, an advocate of rent control. I was like, oh yeah, rent control. That seems like a good idea. Wish more cities would do it. Then you could get, more diverse mix of people at various income levels, and people who don't have as much money could afford to live, in these nicer places and all that. And literally this past weekend, I was like, oh, something came across my Twitter feed from an economist I follow about, like, the negative externalities of rent control. Kind of went, oh, weird. That's not what I expected from this economist who generally leans more left. And so I started going down the rabbit hole. Was like, oh my God, everything I research about rent control, it's actually quite a bad deal for everybody involved. Like maybe the three people, I have some actor friends in New York who live in a rent control department. And I'm like, oh, that seems great. Like those actors couldn't live in New York if they did. Well, turns out maybe they're having a good experience, but broadly speaking, it's just bad. Like it's bad for everybody long term, and lots of people short term too. And so I don't have to go through the experience. I hope that if someone put me in charge of city planning, I'd be like, hey, there's lots of expert data here that says rent control is not the right. And that's what I want to believe about, tech startup culture, whatever, hustle culture, or not having boundaries at work, or how to structure a team, or why people who are far away across many layers of management aren't able to, connect up their incentives to the work that needs to be done as well. Like all these things, I think I could have learned without doing it myself. I hope.
Yeah, it's this yin and yang, right? Of the training the mind on a way you want to act and think and respond, right? And be open to and look at data in a meaningful way, right? Versus in it pushing, like when you're in it and you're pushing, man, it's difficult to take a step out, right? And I would assume that the board that you had and the advisors were all either the VC guys or picked by the VC guys. And so there's probably a very clear tint of the advice and recommendations and lifestyle that they were pushing you to represent.
We all, right? We all read the same publications. Like it's all, we're all like, oh yeah, did you see this in TechCrunch? Did you see this from Paul Graham? Did you see this from, Fred Wilson? Did you see this from Brad Feld, who was actually on our board of directors? Did you read Hacker News today? Did you check out the front page of Tech Meme? You see what this company's doing? We all consumed all the same stuff, right? And we all went to the same events and knew a lot of the same people, and the people in that ecosystem were on our board of directors. I have no data. This is impossible to reverse engineer, but Liam, last year Moz sold. I wasn't on the board of directors anymore. I wasn't involved with the company at all, but it sold to a private equity company. I don't think it was a fantastic deal or anything, at least not for Moz's shareholders, certainly not for employee shareholders. But the year before, I had stepped off the board and recommended to Moz that, basically I put someone in my board seat, Asia Arangio, who works with a bunch of software as a service businesses as a consultant and sees a lot of stuff across both venture and non-venture worlds, but she comes from a non-venture world. And Tara Reid, who runs Apps Without Code, and she was our independent board member after I stepped down. The company had been trying to sell for a long time and finally got over that hump. I don't know, maybe Tara and Asia helped to bring a perspective that I could not bring, that other people could not bring, and get that get that deal over the hurdle. But yeah.
The depression component, did you experience that previous to this, or was this kind of your first interaction with depression?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, yeah, probably. No, I had definitely anxiety and mental health and depression types of issues as a teenager and young adult in my early 20s. I don't know that I would have been able to classify them, but many of the same pathways were these, the paths had been tread before, felt familiar.
I asked because during high school, I went through some of those cycles and ended up seeing therapists, and just the cultural pressure of going to see a therapist is huge, right? Particularly in high school or middle school. And it's like,
and when we were growing up, right? Like,
it's like,
today, different story, right? Like, kids today completely expected, and like that, I think it's been normalized, but we were, I think, right on the cusp of that, like, generation, the sort of last generation of American men where it was not okay to talk to a therapist, right? And like, I mean, yeah, my dad would, I don't know, rather swim the Atlantic than, than talk to a therapist.
right. And a lot of people that influence our, upbringing, way of life, right? How we view the world. And so that was challenging, but you could clearly see a pattern, right? Once you started spending enough time outside and looking in, right, on that pattern of like, oh, I feel this way. Oh, yeah. And okay, this is what's going to happen next. And then you have a choice, right, in terms of where you go from there. And it's tough, right? So I still see those cycles in my life today as well.
I mean, I just hope, what I really hope around all of that stuff is that we are done with what's the solution to this, this mental health crisis that I'm experiencing? And for many previous generations, it seemed to be, I shall visit this trauma upon my children. And I hope that we're done with that, right? That I think it would do a great service to the planet if we would fix ourselves, heal ourselves, and if we're not doing that, at least not take it out on,
Yeah. I think the unfortunate thing is I don't think a lot of those people understand or know that they're just mirroring the behavior from when they grew up, right? And so they're inflicting it down, but not consciously, right? It's just a byproduct of what that was, right? And to take a step out and be like, hey, I don't want to be like that, and I'm going to do different things. Insanely challenging, right? It goes back to what we were talking about, right? Your time at Moz, like when you're in it and moving forward and no one's telling you something else, like that's tough.
Yeah. I think that this, it's also true inside of entrepreneurship world. You started a business, you're running it, you're surrounded by people who, maybe feel a certain way about the way you're supposed to build a business or how you have to. And there's almost this, I don't know if it's as true in kind of indie startup world, but it's very true in venture-backed world. I've seen it in plenty of kind of, whatever, people who run car dealerships or have a plumbing business or, run a series of physical therapy clinics, sort of small business owners, that they almost feel a need to suffer, to haze each other, and to go through this painful process, and then to sort of have that pain is just part of being an entrepreneur, that kind of thing. And it's baloney. That's not at all true. You don't have to do it. You can design a very chill experience as a small business owner or as an entrepreneur, and you can choose how to sort of architect a business that will require whatever, fewer on-premises hours from you, fewer hours behind a keyboard, less or more customer support, less or more risk in the deals that you make with your whatever suppliers or data gathering or those kinds of things, right? You are the captain of your choices in all of this stuff. And I think that it's those kinds of decisions where, you've essentially been digging yourself a hole for years, and now you're buried and it feels like there's no way out. And so your response is not, how did I get into this hole? How can I help other people avoid this hole? How can I dig myself out? It's everybody has to dig a hole this deep.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the captain of your choices, right? I think there's too many people that fall into the fallacy of this is how you have to do it, and here's the path. And it's like, great, I got here, now I do this, now I do this, right? And it's almost pre-programmed in terms of what that response looks like, right? And it sounds like in the tech world, there's a rite of passage and somewhat a modern day fraternity of hazing that is, we did it, you're going to do it because, hey, we had to go through that shit. You're going to go through it as well, right? And it's like, why?
Yeah, no, I think there's a can't remember the name of the psychological principle, but it's sort of this idea that if you want to kind of build a very close contextual network, going through shared suffering together is one of the powerful ways to do it. And I would just argue that that's not the only way, and you don't have to create your own trauma or follow a roadmap that is filled with that. And so, there's all sorts of examples of this, but I actually just last night, Liam, published a blog post on SparkToro about kind of our values and the way we operate, almost the OS for how SparkToro, it's a tiny team, it's only 3 people, but how we've been able to kind of grow and build this thing. And a lot of that is just, we have an extremely uncomplicated product, uncomplicated structure, uncomplicated way of working. We have very big boundaries with, like I mentioned, the number of hours I'm willing to work, meetings I'm willing to take, how we respond to customer support, and how we support the product or don't, how we build the product so that people can support it themselves, right? So that it can be really self-service as opposed to hands-on. Just all this kind of stuff. There's no sales team because we don't require sales, right? Our funnel for getting people to the product is to have a completely free version, and then as they find that useful and they want more of it, they pay. So it's architecture decisions. We could have absolutely chosen to build a completely different kind of business. It might have been more technically, financially successful, maybe less, hard to know, but done it in such a way that would require a big customer support team, a big sales team, a significant engineering team, all that kind of stuff.
Do you make more now or when you were at the top at Moz?
Let's see, technically, I am paying myself less right now, but my deferred salary plus the profits from the business are much more than I was making at Moz. Because, at Moz, my salary was basically voted on by the board. So, I leave the room, board sort of votes to make my salary whatever number it was. I think, to be honest, it was only as reasonably generous as it was, which was still a good amount below like a Seattle software engineering manager's average, because my mom was on the board of directors and she was like, no, we should pay him. And because we were co-founders, right? But I was making, most of the years I was at Moz, I was making right about $150,000 to $160,000 a year. If I worked at Microsoft as like an engineering manager, whatever, Microsoft has all these like crazy levels, like level 42 or something, it might be average. Lower levels are higher up in the org, right? So like Bill Gates was level 1 when he was there or whatever. So anyway, I would have been making 220, 240, right? Like, yeah.
So where I was headed with that is, I'm fairly confident you're much happier where you are now with the big boundaries and the less, right? And you're like, even if compensation was substantially less than it was there, you'd probably take it.
No, I mean, when I left Moz, I had a very generous job offer, like a close to 7 figures a year type of job offer from one of the big tech companies, which was quite flattering. And I was like, oh, maybe I should think about that. No, I'm not going to think about, I'm not interested in that. That is not, I think I'm going to have a really sad, horrible time there. And it just, nothing's worth that, right? Like there's not an amount of money that makes years, especially, I think it's one thing when you're in your 20s and you're sort of staring at what you hope are many, many decades to come. And so you think like, yes, I will take more money now, even if that's not optimal for the life I want to lead. But yeah, I mean, 20 years later, I'm in my early 40s and I kind of go, God, how many years do I have? Maybe I'm halfway through my career, a little more, maybe. Do I want to sacrifice 4, 5, 10 of them doing anything that doesn't feel, like I'm going in the direction I want to go long term and contributing to the world I want to see, and building something I'm excited about, and making enough money, right? Like, enough is such a great, hard to reach concept. I don't understand why so few people, especially so few people who have so much, can't get enough. I almost wonder if it's like the mentality that gets you from, I don't have enough to, my cup overfloweth, is the same one that holds you back from saying, whoa, wait a minute, whatever it is, $10 million, $20 million, like, I'm good. I can slow my roll, at least on the personal financial gain side, and start optimizing for other things in my life and career.
Yeah. It's always more and more and more, right? And I think that obviously the consumerism and the advertising that goes into it, but for founders in particular, right? And I was mentoring someone recently, and you go follow that. If you follow the software model and you go into the VC, right? It's raise funds, go fast, raise more funds, go faster, raise more. And it's just like, it never ends, right? Like,
Nope.
can you
You
design?
can't get off that carousel until, it crashes and burns, and, and everybody's thrown off, or you have the exit. Like, there's no middle ground.
So I was counseling my mentee. I was like, can you make it profitable from day one, right? Like, and if you don't take money, can you be profitable? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Well, you grow much slower. Yeah. And like, right. And just this power of choice, right? But this idea of like more and more and more is not always the right answer, and trying to think through what that looks like and optimizing for something other than what everyone else is told, right, can be very challenging.
I think it's a beautiful thing when you free yourself from the constraints of what you think you're supposed to want, or what you've been trained to want, or what you've been cultured to desire, and instead pursue things that matter to you. That's, that's like many levels up the experience ladder.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up here, Rand, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to kind of entrepreneurs or startups, right, who are moving in this direction, starting to see profitability, right, or dealing with what we talked about today, right, like, what's one piece of advice you would leave them?
Yeah. So I think profitability is a beautiful, freeing thing. It lets you optimize for so much in your business and your life, and what you want to build. But I would think carefully just about the decisions that you've made, how you structured your business to require certain inputs and certain outputs. Does your business need as many people as you were planning on hiring this coming year? Could you do more with less? Does your business absolutely need all of the whatever things that you buy, component parts or services or labor? Could you change that? Could you change how much you charge? Could you change who you're charging it to? And if you change all of these kinds of things, can you build a business that is more focused around what you actually want to do, rather than, trying to, shore up a house in a hurricane, instead of thinking about, oh, what if I move to a hurricane-free area?
What, you can choose that?
Oh yeah, it turns out emigration from Southern Florida is allowed. you can move to other parts of the country, or even to other countries, and I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs fail to recognize. But hopefully, right, hopefully we all can learn from each other. So all of the folks out there who are having painful experiences, especially those who share and write about it and talk about it on podcasts, and put up blog posts and publish books and give talks, that is so meaningful to the rest of us, because it helps us see that there is this incredible diversity of opportunities and choices that we can make.
That's awesome. If the audience wants to connect back with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you, Rand?
Yeah, I am rand@sparktoro.com. And the place where I'm most active, if you want to sort of follow things that are going on with me, is at Randfish on Twitter.
Very cool, Rand. Appreciate your time and the insights and sharing a bit of your story.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Liam.